Take a person, take a story, take you on a journey. It's your take.
On today's Your Take, I'm joined by a vocal coach. My guest client roster spans across many genres, from rock to pop, choral groups, opera singers, and even teachers and attorneys. When recording artists want to up their game, he's the one they call. He's worked with American duo Naked Blue, singer-songwriter Jennifer Hope, Neil Fallon of Clutch, Nate Bergman of Lionize, and Eddie and Wolfgang Van Halen. In addition to voice coaching, my guest is a bassist, guitarist, music instructor, luthier, and producer. His CV includes 7 years as a musical director for singer Gary Puckett and studio manager at the famous Shangri-La recording studios, where he worked with a wide range of artists, including Mark Knopfler. On today's Your Take, I talked to Peter Strobl. We discussed Peter's early life and his upbringing, Peter's love of music and how he got his break in the industry, what made him decide to become a vocal coach, working with the stars. A very warm welcome, Peter. Thanks for joining us today on Your Take.
Great to be with you, James. Thanks for having me.
Quite a long introduction, and we're obviously going to cover in some depth.
Thank you and good night.
Interviews a wrap. Before we discuss at length your career in
Sure.
many kind of musical guises, I always like to go back to the very beginning and find out the roots where it all began from childhood.
Mm-hmm.
You were born in Salzburg, Austria. What are your memories of childhood and moving to America at a young age? And can you tell us about your parents, what they did for a living, and do you have any siblings?
I'll go backwards. I have a sibling. I've got a brother 4 years my senior, so he's senior as hell. And we came over when I was 3. My dad was a trained electrician in Europe. My mom was actually Yugoslavian and had escaped. She was a refugee from Yugoslavia and escaped during the war to Salzburg, where my grandfather lived. And that's where my dad met her at the time. He was driving a truck for Stars and Stripes. And this is right after the war. And they would, my mom was working for the Red Cross, and they would go to all these restaurants where the American GIs were eating and take the slop off their plates and dump it in these kettles and make soup for the school kids and take it around to all the schools, because the area was in a horrifying depression at the time. They got married. I showed up and I took a look around and I said, this is not for me. Let's go to America. And so at 3 years old, we got on a ship, 12 days on the ocean. And I actually do remember little tiny memories of that, you know. And then I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, on a street where hardly anyone spoke English. Didn't speak English until we started school, so got beat up a lot. And then when I was just about in high school, like 13, 14, we moved to California. So I spent all my time since then in Southern California until 5 years ago. My dad played guitar. He had a little Silvertone guitar that he used to sit around and play folk songs with my mom while they did their housework or hung out. And so I used to steal his guitar away from him at night and try and figure out how to play it, you know. And then I think one night I had a little radio that I pulled out of my neighbor's trash can and fixed, and listened late at night, and I heard ba 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 ba, feel free, ba ba. Changed everything. First time I heard Cream at midnight, I said, that's what I want to do. I want to be one of those guys. So I got together with guys in the neighborhood, and we scraped together enough money to buy $39 electric guitars and drive everybody nuts and go from garage to garage and terrorize everyone's eardrums until we were able to learn some songs. We were learning, what were we doing at those days? We were doing Yardbirds and Eric Burdon and the Animals, and Beatles songs were too hard to play because they had bar chords. We had to learn bar chords from looking at pictures of George Harrison and magazines. And how far do you want me to go? Up to the present?
No, an interesting insight into your childhood, and obviously coming from Europe and moving to the USA and talking about some of the influences. I want to pick up on specifically on your time in California and trace it back to your school years. What are your memories from your school years, and were they happy times in your early life? Which subjects were you particularly interested in? And did you go on to further education?
I hated school. I would sit in class and look out the window and wonder why we were being warehoused like that, because I'm a voracious reader and I read everything I wanted to learn. So I sat in school and was just bored to tears. I played sports. I wanted to be a basketball player. I was large for my age. I was about to say I was large for my size, but that's redundant. And I wanted to play basketball. So I moved from one school to another because they offered classes that weren't offered at this school. So I could play basketball at that school, but the classes were in the music department. So I found myself in the music department of the school, and the guy who kind of became my mentor at that time had gone to a major university on a football scholarship, broken his collarbone, ended up in the music department. So I had a really good understanding with this guy, and we had a lot of athletes in the music department. And I ended up quitting playing basketball, ended up in the music department, and really took to it. I mean, I was already playing in bands like for 2-3 years, but then I started studying classical music and went back to Europe at 15 to visit my grandparents, and then fell in love with the whole classical music scene. I had a chance to go to a couple of performances at the Salzburg Festival, and decided to be an opera singer. So I studied voice seriously with some serious people, and gradually grew to dislike the people you had to hang around with if you're studying classical music, because for me, the American classical musicians were so serious and so staring at their scores and conducting themselves all the time. So I went on the road at 20 out of college. I went to college for 3 years, studied what I wanted to study, read all the theory books and read the counterpoint books and read orchestration books and learned what I wanted to learn so that I could sleep through class. And I got good grades. But then I just went on the road with a power trio and played these shitty clubs all over America, blowing up our cars and loading our amps up in these Volkswagen vans and playing these really crappy little clubs, but making money and having a great time.
It's interesting because so far you've given us an insight coming from a musical family background. You've spoken about your years studying and how that kind of 60s explosion really kind of caught your imagination with Eric Clapton and the Cream and the kind of British blues invasion as well. I want to pick up on your experiences of living in the US and also going back to Europe where you were born. And I wanted to ask about your experiences of living and working in the US, and what would you say were the major cultural differences? And when we come into kind of the early phases of your musical career, can you talk us about some of your early jobs and roles and how you initially got your foot through the door?
Well, I came of age in LA, Los Angeles, which is where everyone goes to get famous. And what they don't realize is that everybody in LA is looking for some band someplace else to bring to LA to make famous. It's just insane. It was then anyway. But at that time, every nightclub, every steakhouse, every restaurant had a dance floor, so you could work. We were working all the time. We used to work 5-6 nights a week, 5 sets a night, and make real money playing top 40, playing cover songs. You know, it was disco times. And the disco years were a great time to be a bass player because there were great bass lines, you know, great bass players to copy. We didn't know who they were at that time because record credits weren't what they are now. Now everybody gets a credit. In those days, it was like, here's this band, here's the music, buy the music. And we didn't know Louis Johnson from Louis Farrakhan. But the environment was really interesting. Everybody in LA knows somebody. And so whenever you have conversations with anyone at that time, everybody was in between record deals, you know, and a record deal at that time meant that we were, you know, we might be recording at some studio at 3 o'clock in the morning when everybody was out, because the engineer would, you know, take our $100 and put some used tape on the machine and get us a demo out, you know, and everybody thought, I mean, we really, all of us, I think, were at certain times looking at Ferraris and thinking any time now, any minute now, you know. And we had a showcase at a showcase club for RCA at the time, this band that I was in called Target. And our lead singer, and we had really good songs. Our lead singer got nervous, drank a bottle of red wine and puked on his shoes on the first song. And I saw our guy, the guy who was going to sign us, I won't mention any names, he was in the back of the room, and he just kind of looked, he went like this, and he walked out, and we never saw him again. So there was, I mean, you could have swept the streets with failed bands at that time. Everybody thought they were going to get famous, you know, and we played all the same places that all the people that made it did. And brushed shoulders with, you know, you'd be walking in, you know, loading gear into the Whiskey A Go-Go, and you didn't know it at the time, but Van Halen was loading their stuff out, or the Starwood or whatever club it was. You know, the Hollywood scene was insane at the time. But I made the mistake of learning how to read music and learning how things worked. So I always ended up to be getting hired to do real music things, you know. So I wanted to be, when I joined Gary Puckett's band, I wanted to be the guy who was just good enough that they wouldn't fire him for being late. And then subsequent to my first year with him, the rest of the band left on the second Monkeys tour, and Gary called me. I was just getting ready to do some other auditions around town. And Gary called me and says, hey, could you put a band together for me? Because everybody's leaving. I went, oh no, I've got to write charts. I've got to hold the plane tickets. I've got to be responsible. I got to wake everybody up. That's the way that went.
Gary Puckett's name comes on very nicely to my next question. And you spent 7 years of your life working with Gary as a musical director.
Mm-hmm.
How did you meet Gary, and how did that opportunity come about? And what did that role specifically entail?
Well, I had been acting as musical director for a couple of different Las Vegas type acts. There were music reviews where we had jugglers and magicians and God knows what. And we were playing in and out of shows of, you know, we'd be 3 weeks trading the stage with BB King or with Tower of Power or with, in these Vegas and Tahoe and Reno lounges. And a friend of mine, a guitar player who I played with in LA, after the first Monkees tour ended, Gary was on that tour. It was the Monkees and Gary and the Turtles and Grassroots, a bunch of 60s bands. That ended, so all these acts decided to go out on their own because it generated a lot of action for them. And the guitar player called me because he went with Gary. Gary hired him to put a band together for Gary. And he called me and said, "Do you want to play bass?" Because the bass player that he wanted was going with the Grassroots. So all these guys, one went this way, one went that way. And I just lucked into the gig. And I had always admired Gary. I mean, what a tremendous voice. So I first met him at a rehearsal stage in North Hollywood, having been hired. And it was just a matter of learning the tunes and fitting in. And I really love Gary. He's a great guy. We're still in touch all the time. Whenever he's on this part of the world, we try and hook up. Still out there singing his ass off. Yeah.
I want to talk about another phase in your musical career, moving on to a different avenue. And that's your time working as a producer and studio manager. What made you decide to focus in this area? What is it you most enjoy about the discipline of music production and studio management?
Well, I've always kind of been going in reverse every time I've changed directions like that. I was, after working with Gary, I got hired to play for a guy named Blaine Cheney, Beej Cheney, who was the lead singer for a band called The Suburbs out of Minneapolis. And they had quite a following. And Beej had moved to LA, was doing some demos. Our sound guy that was out with Gary, it's a guy named Jim Kniper. He had been a recording engineer of some note. He did There Goes the Neighborhood with Joe Walsh. He produced and mixed Ringo Starr's first all-star band record. But he wanted to get out of the for personal reasons, out of the LA studio scene. So he came on the road with us, with Gary. So we spent 5-6 years hanging out. And then when he was producing, he produced the Suburbs last record. And then he took Beej and was going to bring him to LA and produce records with him. So he called me to come in and play. It was a cover of Pushing Too Hard, Sky Saxon and the Seeds. Because Beej is a really aggressive, like he'll jump off of anything to land anywhere to get a reaction. He's just an insane frontman. And then he took a liking to me. So I started working with him and started writing with him. We put a band together, did a short tour, and then we had this little studio in North Hollywood called Brown's Feet, where Jackson Browne had lived to write The Pretender, and Lowell George used to hang out there quite a bit and do some writing. It was a little shitty little studio, but it was really cool. And we had taken it over. We're screwing the last screws into the wall to create this little 16-track studio, and Beej walks in and goes, "How'd you guys like to move to Malibu?" We're going, "Man, we just finished this place. This is going to take years." So he had bought Shangri-La, which was falling apart. The guy who owned it was going to level it and just turn it into surfer condos because it's overlooking a bluff in Zuma Beach. It's just a wonderful situation. So he decided to save the place, and we went in and went bumper to bumper and tore all the carpeting out and tore everything out of the place and rebuilt the studio. We found an old bus that somebody had turned into a recording studio, brought it up the hill, and put a 16-channel API console into it. And gradually just started populating the studio with insane gear because the Beej had good finances. So we were able to create a really nice recording environment. And basically Shangri-La was the three of us. It was Beej that had the money and the vision to do it. Jim, who had the balls and the tools, to tear out walls and make it happen. And me, who's tall, so I could hold things while he screwed them together. And then gradually we started bringing some clients in, and we started producing Beach's record. And then Jim left. So Beach asked me if I'd like to be, because Jim was running the studio, asked me if I'd like to be studio manager. And our first client at that point was Mark Knopfler. So it wasn't the kind of studio that had a staff. We had a girl called Elizabeth, who was fantastic, who would answer the phone and make sure we didn't get arrested. And then we had Beach, who had all the right jewelry and the right cars. And then we had me, who did everything else. So the first night that Mark was there, we started plugging things in and nothing worked. Chuck Ainley, who's Mark's engineer and co-producer, was plugging his stuff into our patch bay, and he was going, "Pete, nothing works. Nothing's working. I can't get any signal through." Turns out that when we built the place, we wired the place pin 3 hot, which is backwards, out of phase from pin 2, which everybody else in the world does. So Mark came up to me and said, "Well, Pete," called me Petey, because Elizabeth called me Petey, which I could slug her for, but everybody up there ended up calling me Petey. He says, "PT, Chuck tells me that nothing is working. What are we going to do?" And I said, "Leave it to me." So I stayed up for 2 nights with a soldering iron and rewired all the machines. It was just insane, but it worked. And he made a wonderful record. He did the Shangri-La record there, which is one of my favorites of his. And being a studio manager there entailed basically making sure nobody stole anything, making sure there was coffee, making sure there was toilet paper, because there was no staff. It was just us. And it was, I don't know if you've ever seen any pictures of Shangri-La, but it was kind of a hideout. You know, it was it's an old sprawling ranch home on a bluff in Malibu, out way in the sticks in Malibu on the north end, with a guest house that was a barn where Mr. Ed used to live. And the horse, which you may not be aware of who Mr. Ed is, but if you look it up, you'll know. And the band lived there when they rehearsed, when they were rehearsing for the last waltz. And then other people, Eric Clapton did No Reason to Cry there. And a bunch of people came through there, but it had fallen into disrepair. And then we brought it back from the dead. And it was kind of a hideout. It was like, you know, we didn't want anybody to really know there was a studio there, because then it brings, you know, tourists and people with cameras and people with clipboards asking what's going on. And, you know, we're kind of working on the down low.
You've talked in depth about the role of the producer and the studio manager and how you managed to fall in that area. And you've spoken about your fondness for the Mark Knopfler album produced at the studios with the same name.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like working with Knopfler, an exceptional guitarist and musician? But can you also talk about some of the other notable artists you worked with at the studio and any particular fond memories?
My fondest memory of Mark is the first night he was there. We were unpacking his guitars, and we'd met maybe 3 weeks before when he was coming to visit and see if he wanted to work at the studio. So we knew each other from, "Oh, this is Pete and this is Mark. Hi, how you doing?" So we're sitting there unpacking his guitars, and he's got these beautiful instruments. And I open this one case, and there's a red Stratocaster in there. And it's his signature Strat that Fender makes, right?
Yeah.
But me being me, I turn it over and there's no serial number on the plate. I go, "What's this piece of shit, Mark?" And Mark says, "Well, that's my signature Strat." And I went, "How do you know? There's no serial number. I mean, they could have sent you some Chinese piece of crap. How do you know it's yours? He goes, well, that's the prototype.
Ah.
And he says, and he looks at me, he goes, you're giving me shit right now, aren't you? I go, yeah. He goes, okay, good. We're going to get along. So basically with Mark, I didn't do anything musical with Mark. I just made sure that those guys had everything they needed, and everything that would make life easy for them when they worked, because they were kind of a closed door. You know, when they were working, it was boop, doors are closed and they're in there and you leave them alone. But what a great bunch of guys. You know, I mean, we had all our meals together. He wouldn't let anybody start eating until everybody was there. You know, he's a real, I don't know if you've met Mark, but he's a real gentleman. And here's the kicker. 2 weeks after he leaves, another guitar shows up for him, addressed to him. And I said, and I emailed him, I said, Mark, what do you want me to do with this guitar? He goes, oh, that's for you. So I don't know if you could see it back here.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, the famous red.
He
Fender.
sent this. Yeah,
Yeah.
he sent this as a thank you card.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah. And he goes, and he wrote a little note and he says, never forget that a good guitar will be your friend for life. So what a sweet guy. But we had who else did we have? We did Tom Jones on a vocal one day. He stood in the same place in a pool of sweat for 8 hours straight, never quit singing. I mean, watching someone of that stature work that hard is really inspiring, and should be inspiring towards for kids who I work with now, who ask me, well, how much should I practice? I just want to smack them in the side of the head and go, your parents should be calling you in to make sure that you eat something or get some rest. You should be practicing all the time. You should love it. You know, as Mark would say, you know, there's many nights where he fell asleep with the guitar on his chest. Because if you want to be good, you really have to want it badly, and you have to work really hard at it. We had Chaka Khan in. We had, the Kebmo Suitcase album was the last thing we recorded there before I left. And that was inspiring. I mean, Keb had all the best LA guys. Greg Leitz playing pedal steel. And you could hear, you know, any of the things that got recorded there, you could really hear the room. It was a wonderful sounding room. Matter of fact, my favorite thing that Mark did there was a year later when he came in and did the one take sessions from Shangri-La, where they just set up the band and played the entire album live for radio bumps. But he liked it so well that he released it, and the performances are stupendous. And there was no overdubs. It was just them playing. It was wonderful.
We moved from you reminiscing about your time at Shangri-La Studios. Some very fond words about Mark Knopfler, and we oddly been on something of a Dire Straits theme with Your Take, because we have interviewed a few Dire Straits former members.
I saw that, yeah.
Yeah, interesting to hear your thoughts on Mark. We move on now to your work as a teacher, but specifically a voice teacher. And earlier on in the interview, you did mention about learning to sing and being classically trained, but what made you decide to become a voice teacher? When did this happen? And why were you particularly interested in working with vocalists?
I was already teaching to get enough money to go to school when I was 19, 20 years old. My second and third year in school, I had like 40 private students. And I was not qualified, but I was just regurgitating things that I'd heard. And then my teacher became, he had a tough year, my third year in school. He had a case of phlebitis, so he missed a lot of school, and he'd have me take over his classes. So I was learning by teaching. And through the years, I always sort of became the vocal director of the bands I was in. With Gary's band especially, anybody that played in Gary's band had to sing, because his songs had a lot of really nice vocals, and we had to cover those songs live. So whoever played keyboards had to be a singer. Whoever played drums had to be a singer. We had a horn section when I was first with him, and subsequently we hired a horn section. All those guys sang. So we would do exercises before the gig and warm up together, and then sing through all the vocals and his hits before we hit the stage. And it was reflected in performance. The band was really good. So I've always taught voice since I was about 19, without knowing what the hell I was doing. And as I progressed, I realized that most of the people that I studied with didn't know what the hell they were doing either. The voice teaching thing, seriously, I'm really happy to talk about this, is a real racket, because there is a right way. You put your fingers in a certain place on a guitar and the specific notes come out. You put your fingers on a horn, you put your fingers on a piano, there's a pedagogy, you do this and that happens, correct? With the voice, we're walking around in this instrument, and singers are the laziest people on the planet, because they get all the attention and all they have to do is get close and everybody goes ooh and ah. And especially with all these, the TV shows that are on, if you sing really high and loud, people go nuts and they're clapping and tell me who came in second on the 4th season of American Idol.
I would have no foggiest idea.
No, you wouldn't.
No.
And the thing is that person thought they were going to be famous, right? Because they got treated like, like a prize-winning German Shepherd in a dog show. You get pampered, and then when your contract's up, it's over. Because you don't get taught anything. And there are voice teachers on this planet who have no clue what they're doing, but they come up with a gimmick. They come up with a DVD set of, tips and tricks and secrets and shortcuts to, and the only thing that works is the same thing that works for any other physical discipline on the planet. You have to do the reps. You have to do the exercises. You have to set yourself up so that what you intend to happen happens every time. So you're consistent, because I don't know anybody whose name if you think of a singer, any singer whose name resonates, who you can Google, that's not a lazy person. Otherwise, you wouldn't know who they were. They worked their ass off to get to where they are. And the world is, I tell my students all the time that there's two kinds of people in the world. There's the people who are on stage, and there's all the people who are paying money to go see them. And it's up to you how hard you want to work to figure out which side of that stage you want to be on. Because for everyone who's up on stage singing, there's a crowd of people in the back of the room talking about how much better they are than that person, but they're not up there because they haven't done the reps.
Shortly, I wanted to get into the specifics and talk about some of the techniques and methods you use to train vocalists. But my question beforehand is, if you took a person, say, like myself, who I would say doesn't have a particularly good singing voice, or maybe somebody who has aspirations to be a singer in a band, or, as I said from my introduction, you've worked with people outside of the music business. Can you take someone who is deemed to have a bad voice and turn them into a good quality singer? Is that possible?
Yes.
Yeah.
The answer is yes. And I've done it a million times. The first thing I would do is find the person that deemed that person a bad singer and go to their house and have a word and get them sorted out, and find out exactly what their intentions were and what their weaknesses are, and not being able to see the possibilities. But when you phrase that question, when you listen back to it, listen to how you phrase that question, and you have a musical da 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 da. There's melodies going on there. And what I do sometimes with students, well, frequently, is I'll have them speak into a microphone, and just while we're having a conversation, and I'll record them. And then I'll take that recording, that waveform, and put it into a tuning software and show them, this is where you speak. These are the notes that you're speaking. The things that you're saying, the words you're saying are occurring on actual notes that are identifiable on the piano. And very frequently there are singers who sing in the wrong keys, who sing in keys because that's the key they play guitar in. They're used to, oh, my guitar sounds good capoed on the 3rd fret, so I'm going to sing up here. And they don't realize they have this rich, beautiful, low voice that they're not using because they insist on capoing their guitar because some other shit kicker is doing it that way, and that's the way they want to do it. So identifying where the voice actually lies, because everybody's different, is first, and then working your way out. Sometimes with a burned out voice, you might only have one note. You know, I've had singers, notable people whose voices were relatively cooked. When I go, sing this, ooh, 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 they go, and nothing comes out. So I just go, you know, exhale and just let whatever comes out, comes out. Let's start with that. And you start with whatever you start with and work your way out. And I've never, not once, had someone not sing. Even back in college when I was teaching and not knowing what I was doing, I never had anyone, I got all the tone deaf people because the other teachers didn't want to deal with it. So I had to get creative and I had to figure it out. And I never had anybody not be able to sing. I mean, one thing that I found really useful is I use electric bass to do vocal exercises. And I came upon it as an accident because I moved house and my piano got knocked around. It was out of tune and I had lessons to teach. So I pulled out my bass and I played exercises for this student who was a female student, really good singer, college age at the time. She's now a notable voice teacher on her own. She couldn't match pitch with the bass. And I was like, wait a minute, how is that possible? But the bass is 2 octaves away from where she's used to hearing herself. And now I use it almost exclusively because it forces you to sing in tune. So much intonation has to do with, you know, if I say to you, James, say, stop thief, that's my car. Go ahead, say that.
Stop thief, that's my car.
Now you just matched pitch with me. Stop thief, that's my car, right? So that tells me that you can sing a melody. So if I find those notes on my bass and match them with you, then we have a place to start. Rather than, you know, you've got teachers who do these huge da 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 on these monstrous scales that are bigger in size than any pop song. I mean, if somebody wrote a pop song with that kind of range in it, they've got to be investigated. And if you can't do that, they think, okay, well, you're not the student for me. And my question is always, well, why don't you start with like an area about this big and make it really good? And then you can work your way out from the middle until you have a voice that you can use. Because most pop songs, I mean, the word pop song, pop means popular. Popular can't be popular unless other people can sing it too. right? So they're not that challenging. But when people, when people go into studying, it's like guitar students, a guitar student will come in and go, I want to learn eruption. What are you, crazy? Learn how to play Happy Birthday, for Christ's sake. Learn how to play Mary Had a Little Lamb. I bet you can't. And I always win that bet because they always shoot for like the hardest thing on the planet. I had a kid who just got a bass. First thing he wanted to do is, I want to learn Rush songs. What are you, nuts? Learn how to play a bossa nova in time. Nobody's going to hire you to play Rush. There already is a Rush. Learn how to play a song, any song.
With that question, you've kind of already answered some of the techniques and methods you use. But obviously, the way you teach, I guess, depends artist to artist. And you kind of training methods, how would you say they vary depending on the artist you work with and kind of what genre they perform? If they're a country singer, for example, or a rock singer, how does it vary, the technique and the way you kind of decide to teach them and express their vocals and
That's a great question.
Their persona on stage as well. I suppose that's a big thing about being a singer as well, having charisma.
That's a great question, James, because there are people who teach emotion, who say, okay, at this point in the song, you got to go, and sound like you're crying, or wince a little bit, make it look like it's hard. I think that the most important thing about being a convincing singer and being someone who other people want to listen to and watch sing is sincerity. You have to be sincere. It's not a matter of selling a song. It's a matter of creating a moment for the listener and having that listener be a better person for having heard what you've got to offer. So it's got to be sincere. It's got to be real. And you can't fake that. There's this whole thing about the correct way to scream for metal songs, and there's no correct way to scream. If someone's stealing your car, you yell. And rock and roll is a rebellious art form. I mean, we torture our amplifiers to the point of distortion where they aren't designed for that, but that's the way we like to use them. And we use our voices the same way. So there are maintenance programs that have to do with getting back what you're frying, so to speak, on the stage, because you can't change. Like, I could never make a guy like Neil Fallon in Clutch sing correctly. I'd ruin his life, because all of a sudden he's going to sound like Tony Bennett and people will start throwing beer bottles at him. He is an aggressive, yelly, bombastic voice. But what I do with him is give him exercises so that when he gets off the stage, he can get back what he just left on the stage, so he can start the next day at ground zero instead of in the hole. You know what I mean? And those techniques all come from my classical background, a lot of them. How to build a voice, how to build a voice on the classical side, but not change the voice, so that when you're performing, you don't think about the exercises, you think about the song, and you let the exercises be what they are. It's like, if you're an athlete, you don't think about how to do a push-up when you're pitching or when you're kicking or when you're playing basketball, but those push-ups are what got you there, right? So if you do the push-ups right and do them correctly, then you're going to be stronger, whatever the exercise is, so that when the game is on the line, that your system will answer and get you through. So it's building resilience, building flexibility, building the ability to sing a long time. I think it's a good singer should be able to sing for 6 to 8 hours nonstop and be better at the end than at the beginning. Physically tired, but not vocally tired. And I've seen it happen time and time and time and time again,
You've coached and worked with several high-profile musicians, including the musical duo Naked Blue, the singer-songwriter Jennifer Hope, Neil Fallon of Clutch, Nate Bergman of Lionize, and Eddie and Wolfgang Van Halen.
Yeah.
Which, I'm putting you on the spot now, but which collaborations have you enjoyed the most and why? And what challenges have been involved with working with some of those musicians?
I enjoy whoever I'm working with at the time that I'm working with them. I mean, that's not a cop out. That's like, if I'm working with somebody, I'm all in. I'm all in. I have to say that sometimes famous people, people think of famous people as being pains in the ass and being entitled and whatever. But when I worked with the first day with Ed and Wolf, I should say, Ed was still smoking at the time. And Ed goes like this. He takes a Marlboro out and he goes, and he exhales this billow of smoke. And he goes, so how am I going to hit all these high notes? And I'm like, oh, Jesus, this is going to be rough. And Wolf, his voice was just changing, 17 years old. And he's like, hi, how you doing? His voice is still cracking a little bit. I said to Ed, it'd be really helpful. I wish we had a mirror in here so you could see your posture when in relationship to some of the things I'm talking about. The next day I walked in there, there's full length mirrors in the studio. He had his guys come in and just redo the place so that they could sing better. And they worked their asses off. When I worked with those guys, I would put them through. I wasn't doing teaching so much as I was training. I didn't, it wasn't important for them to know, well, the epiglottis and then the glottis does this and then the uvula and then the archeus. None of that really mattered. What mattered was results, getting results fast, because Wolfie was stepping into some big shoes and he had to be able to sing high notes fast. So it was like an hour of sweat, work hard, boom, 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 at the piano, sing, 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 sing. And with other people, it's a matter of diving into understanding how the instrument works. There's some people that are more curious that might want to be teachers on their own at some point, but yeah, as far as who is the most fun to work with, it's whoever I'm working with at the time, because I won't work with somebody who's not fun to work with twice. There's no point. There's no point. It's no fun. And here in Baltimore, there's a really sort of a blue collar music scene of a lot of working musicians. So there's no shortage of people who are hungry to get better. And it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun indeed.
And I wanted to talk about technology and your opinions on the use of technology and correction being used by musicians to fix their vocal recordings through auto-tune and pitch correction. Interested to hear your take and your views on technology as a plus or a minus. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the good news is that anybody can make a record with a laptop. And the bad news is that anybody can make a record with a laptop, right? Because now you got to sift through all this garbage to find something worth listening to. I think technology is an amazing, amazing thing if you use it as a tool to help you. My first response to, do you think we should tune this vocal is, how about if we just sing it in tune? Let's start with that. Let's start with singing it in tune, because it is possible to sing in tune. But people make records so fast now that you don't have much time. And the more tools you have, the more technology you have at your command, the easier it is to not have to actually accomplish what used to be accomplishable. I mean, if you listen to records from the 60s and 70s, there's tons of great vocals, and sure, there's probably a lot of those vocals, say Linda Ronstadt or James Taylor or what have you. You might if you isolate it and go, oh, you want to tweak that note right there, but it's the performance that's amazing. So why would you mess with that? But now, you get a good chorus of a song and you just grab that chorus and you stick it onto the next chorus. You grab it and you paste it onto the next chorus rather than going for an emotional performance. And I mean, things get done both ways. A lot of the artists that I work with now take the long way around and actually sing a whole song. I worked with a guy this last weekend. We recorded vocals here in my place for his new record. And he was amazed at how in tune he sounded, because he's used to, this is the first time I've recorded him. He's used to spending another 2 hours tuning his notes. And I'm like, isn't it fun when you can listen to it and you go, God, that's not so bad. Because you can make anything sound good. You really can. I mean, the internet's full of people who auto-tune people making political speeches, and put them to melodies and things. So anything's possible, but that's not the kind of music that I'm interested in. So there's, I do use tuning software sometimes to create background vocals, to take something and copy it and tune it into a background vocal, but then have someone learn that part and sing it to record it for real. So I use it as a tool, and I'll tune vocals if it really has to be, but I'd rather it be performed properly.
Another of your great loves is repairing and restoring instruments.
Yeah.
What got you interested in this area? And can you talk about some of your favorite restoration projects, or maybe even some of your favorite instruments or makes of guitars?
Well, I first started getting into fixing things when the first time I heard Jaco's solo album, Jaco Pastorius' solo album, I had a jazz bass. No, I had a precision bass. I was playing in a disco band. And I thought, oh, I want to sound like that. So I ripped all my frets out and went to work that night. And I'm singing half the songs and it's disco. So we're playing boomba, 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 playing octaves, which have to be in tune, which are impossible to play in tune on a fretless if you've only been playing fretless for 37 minutes. I mean, you have to practice this stuff. But me being 22 years old and an idiot, I thought, oh, you just rip your frets off. You sound just like Jaco. So my band was going to fire me unless I got another bass. So I went and found another used neck, and that was my first bass repair. I changed necks. But then I sent, I would send basses out to be fixed, and I wasn't happy with the way they were fixed. So I just learned how to do things myself. I learned how to do the wiring and things. I mean, I'm not a luthier per se. I couldn't build an acoustic guitar from the ground up, but I can fix them pretty good. When I was at Shangri-La, Beach had a really nice collection of about 200 vintage, really high-end guitars. I mean, really nice instruments. So one of the pleasures of my job was to keep all of those in playing shape. So every day I'd pull out like a 1953 Telecaster and restring it and get it playing right, or pull out a, 52 Super 400 and adjust the action and get it playing right. I mean, so I learned a lot. And there was a guy called Jamie Shane, who's still around, he played in Canned Heat back in the day.
Yeah, great band.
Yeah, and Jamie is a great guitar player, and he taught me a lot about not leaving your fingerprints on something when you're fixing it, so that, he says, if somebody knew you were there, you did a lousy job. That was his saying.
I like that. That's a great saying.
Yeah. So he taught me a lot about how to fix things and not go nuts, not be obvious about it, but just fix them so they work, So, yeah, I mean, I have a bunch of guitars and basses here. I don't have any dead wood. I don't have anything I don't love. And I've always thinking about, I should get rid of some of these things. I go, nah, that's not going to happen. I've got a 62 P bass that I've completely rebuilt because it was trashed when I got it. I've got a, what is this? Oh, I've got here's one of my favorites. This is a 1936 Kalamazoo,
Yeah.
made in the old Gibson factory.
Oh, wow.
And it's got cracks in it and everything else, but I brought it back to life. I found it at an estate sale for next to nothing. And it's got this beautiful Brazilian rosewood fingerboard, because that's what they used in those days. You know, now you can't touch it for less than $1 zillion. And it's a lovely guitar, but it was originally probably $16, I think, with the Montgomery Ward mail order catalog. And that guitar went through the Depression here in the States. So can you imagine the stories it's got?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, fascinating.
It's just fascinating to me.
The whole of this interview, we have talked in some detail all about your career in the music business and the various different guises, I guess it would be a good way of summing up all the areas you've worked in. Let's move away from that and talk about your life outside of work. What are your hobbies and interests? Do you have a family? And if you have children, are any of them musical or follow in your footsteps?
I've got 2 boys, 10 years apart, different moms. My oldest is Pete, who's a basketball coach. He had a 9-year career as a pro and lives in Pittsburgh, has a basketball academy, just moved back to Pittsburgh from Germany, where he was a head coach in the Bundesliga for 6 years. 4 grandkids, all of them are insane athletes. And Pete actually was losing his voice coaching and asked me for some help. So now I've got him singing with 4 Tops and singing the Beach Boys background vocals on the way home at night, going, you know, woo-wee, singing all the falsetto parts, which gets his voice back. Nick, my younger son, is an artist, lives in Portland. And every once in a while might go out and paint a train car or something, but he also does smaller forms. Don't have any hobbies. No, I mean, I do what I love to do. So, I mean, if I have a chance, I come down here. Right now I'm building a little miniature Telecaster for my girlfriend for her birthday. So I'm creating these cool little pickup surrounds out of bits of old tortoiseshell, just for something to do. We live in an old stone house on 2.5 acres. So there's never nothing to do here. There's always something encroaching that has to get chopped back. And I love to, you know, keep in touch with the basketball world, because it's just a great sport.
Do you follow a specific team from the NBA?
No, I follow whoever my kids are dealing with. You know, my oldest grandson is now starting high school, so I'll be following his path. And it's exciting. It's a lot more exciting than watching millionaires running around in short pants.
Yeah, I agree on that one. Peter Strobl, we come to that time in the interview where we ask every guest the same questions and find out maybe things we didn't realize they were into, or things we didn't know about them. We've asked around about 80 guests the same questions. You don't need to think about these in any sort of great detail, but here they are.
What if I get something wrong? Is there a penalty?
It's not like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or anything like that. It's not a quiz. Okay. So to hear your perspective on certain things, here we go. What would you say is your favorite pastime?
My favorite pastime is actually playing bass or guitar. I mean, I'd rather do that than anything else.
Cinema now. I wanted to ask your favorite film and why.
The Third Man with the close second being The Day the Earth Stood Still. But The Third Man is just, I could watch that film every day. There's always something interesting about it. I love it because it takes place in Vienna. So every once in a while you get a little bit of the Viennese dialect, which is music to my ears. And it's a great story. Yeah.
I've been on the Ferris wheel in Vienna.
Have you? Oh, man.
Yeah. And I love the choice because it stars probably, I would say, one of my favorite idols, and that is Orson Welles. He opened my world up to cinema.
Oh,
and
man.
I think it was through his watching Citizen Kane that I discovered people like Renoir and Godard and all the kind of great European filmmakers. I think that all stemmed from seeing that film.
Citizen Kane is just masterful. Yeah. Well, anything he did. Did you ever see The Stranger?
Yeah. Great film. Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
And you could just rotate those three and just throw everything else in the trash.
Lovely choice. Who would you next say is your favorite novelist?
Thomas Wolfe. Thomas Wolfe, American novelist, died in, I believe, 1931. Look Homeward, Angel was his first novel. And he went into Scribner's. He was too long. So his publisher said, we got to trim about 700 pages out of this. So he went in with his pencil and wrote the next novel. He couldn't cut anything. I just wrote, You Can't Come Home Again. If you don't know Thomas Wolfe, pick up a book and check him out. Really, really lovely writing. Very poetic writing, but in prose. There's actually, I think his publisher has put out a book of his work that they reformatted in stanzas. Some of his more poetic things, but really great pictures of America during the 20s and 30s.
If you could have chosen a different profession outside of teaching, outside of music, what would it have been?
I would have been an athlete. I would have played basketball, and right now I'd be retired and in a chrome walker from all the damage to my limbs.
Next, I'm going to ask you your greatest inspiration in life. Who would you choose?
See, you're supposed to always say your father.
Which few people say that, yeah.
Yeah, you're supposed to. And to honor my dad, I would say, my father. But one of my true inspirations is a guy named Buckminster Fuller, who, if you read any Buckminster Fuller, demonstrated how one person could, how to change as much in the world from the viewpoint of one person. That's just an extraordinary mind. Yeah. I don't know if you're familiar with Bucky, but
no, but I'm going to go away from this interview and definitely do some research.
Yeah, he was something else. He invented the geodesic dome structures, and he invented a whole system of mathematics based on. Well, I can't. We don't want to go off on Buckminster Fuller. We'll be here for days, but check him out. You'll dig him. Yeah,
it definitely will be. Yeah, this evening. Do you read a newspaper next? And if so, what would be your newspaper of choice?
I don't, only because there's so much available online. I mean, I read a newspaper. I read the Baltimore Banner, which I get on a news feed on my computer. And I don't have a newspaper delivered because it's just wasteful to have all that paper around. But I used to, when I was at, for years and years and years in LA, I read the LA Times every morning over coffee and do the crossword every morning. But, now that we have these things, we don't need paper anymore.
Cuisine and cookery, but what would you choose as your favorite food?
Wiener Schnitzel with fried potatoes. and sauerkraut. You've been to Vienna.
Yeah.
You've had to.
A long time ago.
You had to have had a Wiener Schnitzel. It's a breaded veal cutlet that's like pounded paper thin and breaded and fried in butter.
No, I didn't think I did. No.
Yeah, every day. I could eat that every day.
Next, we ask you to choose your favorite cultural icon. This kind of stumps a lot of gas, but it could be someone from history, maybe a political figure, someone who maybe changed the world in a certain way. Could be someone from the music world. Who would you choose?
Oh man, I think that I think JFK possibly, because that was a very impressionable time of my life. He was assassinated when I was in 5th grade. I was 11, and I remember being in my grandmother's house on that following Sunday and watching Jack Ruby kill Oswald on TV live. And it's always been just like, holy crap, how the hell did all that happen? But JFK's presidency at that time for many of us was a real optimistic time. Yeah. And his assassination brought about, I think, in a big way, the success of the Beatles coming to the United States, because the United States was really ready for something positive to happen. So he was assassinated in '63 November, and the Beatles came to the Ed Sullivan Show the following February. This is only 3 months later that the Beatles hit the American media. And it was such a blow up, such a positive thing, that I think that those two things are, in my little 5th grade brain, were really tied together.
Kennedy's an interesting choice, and I must admit, I didn't live, or I wasn't born in those times, but I was fascinated by the assassination and read various books and watched documentaries, and of course Oliver Stone's film JFK and his recent documentary as well. Interesting, people always say they remember where they were at that moment when he was assassinated, and very charismatic politician. But I also like Bobby Kennedy as well. I found Bobby Kennedy very dynamic, and I thought it was sad that he never became a president of the US. I
got to shake Bobby Kennedy's hand.
Oh wow!
I was in junior high school, and he came when he was running for president. This was days before he was assassinated, because he was in LA, and he had come to visit. My middle school was next door to Sherman Indian Institute, which is this school for Indians that were American Indians, Native Americans, that were dragged off the reservation and brought to civilization, so to speak, to learn how to be normal people or whatever the fuck they were trying to do. And he was visiting the Indian school, and their athletic fields were adjacent to ours. So he came over while we were out in physical education and was shaking all of our hands while we were, and then like 2-3 days later, man, it was over. Yeah. Bizarre. What a weird time to be a kid when all that was going on. There was Kennedy's and Martin Luther King.
Yeah, you had the Vietnam War in the back going on as well, didn't you?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It was a weird time to be a teenager.
From cultural icons, JFK, a choice. Now to something completely different. Favorite curse word. What is it and why? Very, very random.
Fuck, I don't know.
I think you just
what's a curse? Well, what's a no? What's a curse word? I mean, see, I look at language. I always warn people when I'm doing music clinics or workshops that you're going to hear things you might not hear at church, but that's just the way it goes, because sometimes the right word is the right word, and shit. So I swear a lot. I don't know if you know that. And I've produced a couple of Christian albums, and
you've got to be careful there.
No, but I'm not. No. I took I took my inspiration for one track for this this female singer from Marty Robbins' Devil Woman. It was just the right feel for her song. She never knew it. I think you have to be yourself. And and if you're offended by a one syllable, you know, people say fudge or mother, father or shoot, and we all know what they mean. So
Just
they're being imposters. They're being hypocrites, you know.
When you get some downtime, what would you say is your favorite place or holiday destination?
Oh man. I really like Vienna. I could live in Vienna in a heartbeat. I could live in Salzburg in a heartbeat. I still have really good friends there. We were actually considering going back. But I think we're gonna just groove on where we are now. I love where I live now.
You speak Austrian then?
German. Well, it's German, but with an Austrian dialect. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've done 2 records over there. I've done a record in Vienna with a band called Solid Tube, and I did one in Salzburg with a band called Confused Five. A lot of fun. And I did a workshop. The lead singer of Confused Five, his wife was the head of the vocal department at the Mozarteum. So she arranged for me to do a workshop, a 2-day workshop for them. It was unmitigated fun.
Next, the question that you hate to ask any musician or anyone involved in the music business, but you ask it anyway. It's, who is your favorite music artist? What would you say is your favorite album?
I've got your answer right here. I've thought about this question.
Yeah.
This is, can you see that?
Yeah.
Gustav Mahler, Lied von der Erde, which means Song of the Earth. And this recording of it is with Fritz Wunderlich, tenor, who's probably at the top of my list of great tenors that have ever lived. Died very tragically. Forgot to tie his shoes and fell down a flight of stairs just before he was going to come to the United States for the first time. But this Gustav Mahler, Lied von der Erde, with Christa Ludwig and Fritz Wunderlich is probably my desert island record. I could listen to that and not miss a thing. Second would be the Beatles' White Album. But if I had a choice between the two, I think this one's got more interesting things to
Interesting.
say.
Yeah.
I love classical music. I mean, I love the music of the opera, although opera is such an absurd art form, because you can't possibly think that a 300-pound woman is dying of tuberculosis. But she's singing about it, and it's a beautiful thing. You know, you can't think that, you know, some 250-pound guy is a starving poet, you know, living in a garret in Paris, when you know that the way those buildings were in those days, he'd fall right through the rafters, as fat as he is, but it's still a beautiful art form.
Peter, what would you say is your greatest achievement to date?
Maybe just keeping them fooled this long.
And now the last question of the night, or should I say the afternoon where you are.
Yeah.
How do you wish Peter Strobl to be remembered? Well,
the same way I'd want to be remembered now and the thought of now, and that's to, you know, be somebody who won't bullshit, you know, to be somebody who you can believe. And if I don't know the answer to something, I'll try and figure it out. I won't try to pull the wool over somebody's eyes. I just want to be a real dude who does real things and can be counted on.
Nice way of ending the interview. Thanks. Thank you kindly for your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
it's been a really enjoyable interview. We've spoken about all sorts of things today.
Yeah.
But thanks for sharing your life, what you've done in your career, and what the future might still hold. How do we, as listeners and viewers, find out more about you, or we can go to somewhere on the web and find out more information? What's the best port of call?
Well, I've got I'm on Facebook, which is, I don't know, not that satisfying, I guess. But I've got a blog site called shutupandsing.com, where I rant a bit about teaching and what I think is important as far as teaching. I can send you a link. I think I did send you a link.
Yeah, I did look at it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really the best way. And I always post, like, whoever I'm working with at the time, I, send them a little shout out on my Facebook page. So if there's new recordings, Nate Bergman is about to start a new record, so that's exciting. I don't know, just Google my name and go, oh, geez, not this guy again.
Finally, before we end, there's nothing wrong in ranting, so keep ranting.
Thank you.
And again, thank you for your time and being in the hot seat today for your take.
Always a pleasure. Enjoyed speaking with you.